If you've been following the channel for a while, you'll know I've got an interest in talking about games which aren't just the same big old names. Hopefully you'll also remember some episodes I've previously done which talked about some neat Commodore 64 games released in what I call the dark ages, between its commercial demise and the time when the homebrew scene really came into its own thanks to the power of the internet. After the second of those videos, I got to the point where, rather than recovering and looking at stuff that was out there, I was catching up with the time when I was actively following new releases, and so I wasn't really planning a third part. But needing something simpler to put together to kickstart the old editing mojo, I thought about revisiting some of the games from the last few years which had their time fade out a bit quicker than they might have had should they have been released a little more recently. So that's the plan here, to look at a pack of releases from the early 2010s. Whilst I'm sure plenty of folks will have caught these on their first run, there has been an influx of new folks who've come to the Commodore 64 community within the last few years that may have missed out on some of them, especially because, of course, retro has just gotten more and more popular lately. And yeah, it's worth noting some of these games have seen coverage here on the channel in the past, but as much as I feel a good video should stand the test of time, I can't deny the impact of the powers that be in getting them shown in front of people. So without further ado, let's go check out some gems. To get things going, we've got Bomberland, which brings the best take of Bomberman onto the trusty bread bin. As you'd expect, you've got a single player mode which has you running around each arena, dropping bombs to first clear out the enemies, then locate the exit. All before running out of time, of course. Along the way, you'll find pickups which let you drop more bombs at a time and extend the range of their blasts, with many other options available to pick up, of course, as well. But the thing is, single player isn't where you're going to want to spend most of your time with this one. I mean, yeah, it's what I did to grab footage here, but honestly, you're going to want to grab some friends and dive into its multiplayer modes. I wish I was able to grab footage of that, but being able to get 5-player deathmatches going, thanks to Bomberland supporting both user port joystick adapters as well as a 5th player on keyboard, really shows here. The focus in multiplayer, of course, is player versus player action rather than player versus enemy action. And while maps in the single player game would grow beyond the single screen confines, here in multiplayer, the arenas are locked to a single screen. And that might sound restrictive, but I think it truly adds to the tension when you're going head to head, which honestly is really what you expect when you're trying to crib from Bomberman, and Bomberland really does it well. Just like with Bomberland, Guns and Ghosts, our next game, is one which is truly meant to be played cooperatively instead of all by one's lonesome. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy it solo, but where this single screen run and gunner really stands out is when you've got a friend by your side. The idea is you're playing a pair of paranormal exterminating types, working your way through a load of screens, clearing out all the threats within. In solo play, you just blast them to clear them out. But the real fun is in the aforementioned co-op mode, where one player first needs to stun them, before the other can blast them and put them to death. It's such a simple mechanic that really ratchets up the tension, especially when you're running low on ammo and need to reload, which can be quite painful should you get pinned into a corner with nasties closing in whilst it happens. This alone makes Guns and Ghosts feel quite frantic in ways I don't think we've really seen in this modern era of Commodore 64 gaming. Admittedly, I'm not really given it the time it deserves in its co-op mode, but the way in which it offers something quite different truly makes it worth firing up on the occasion that you've got some gaming friends around. Even more so if they're open-minded enough to want to try something out on a 40-year-old home computer. It certainly wasn't the first remake of an indie hit to make its way over to the Commodore 64, but Super Breadbox, in a way, cemented the concept. Perhaps because it's such a simple idea at its core, but it's one that feels incredibly at home on the trusty breadbit. Unsurprisingly, Super Breadbox is a score chaser, but the way you earn points is by collecting the crates which randomly spawn across the map, over dispatching your enemies. The trick is though, every crate you collect gives you a new weapon. One chosen at random. There's a wide variety of them on offer, straightforward guns of various sizes to more explosive fare, and of course, there's the disc gun, which is probably more dangerous to you than the enemies if you're not careful. Speaking of enemies, your survival is predicated on learning how to use all these weapons to control enemies as they spawn across the screen. You'll really want to prevent them from falling out of the bottom because they'll be enraged and even more hazardous to shoot. One way in which Super Breadbox is superior to the original PC game is that it adds a trio of additional levels which offer some Commodore 64 flair to the proceedings, which to me only goes to show that the humble breadwin can still offer plenty of tricks after all this time. Super Breadbox is really a great port of a game, or a remake if you will, that truly nails the easy to learn, hard to master maximum. Although many of the games covered in this video are original ideas or remakes from modern systems, I feel like it's worth shining a little light on a reworking of a Commodore 64 classic. Released in 2015, Commando Arcade takes the original 1985 conversion and fixes many of its flaws. Flaws like the infamous sprite multiplexor glitches, but there's also the restoration of missing levels, a rebalancing of the challenge, and of course, new music and sound effects. It makes for a great reason to revisit a flawed title from a fresh perspective. And it's the type of dedication I love coming from the scene. Taking an iconic but flawed game, and by using modern tools, techniques and hardware, patch up the flaws and really give it a chance to live up to its true potential. The result of this is a game that is as frantic as the original, but this time with a spot of challenge that will truly test your reflexes and skills to see if you could work your way through all 8 of its levels. Like the original game, it's all about running, gunning, and tossing grenades through to survive those enemies and make your way to the end of level checkpoints. More importantly is, you've really got to conserve your grenades here. They're not as easy to come by as in the original game, just like extra lives, which you're going to have to work for, as they don't come as often as they did in the original. Commando on the Commodore 64 is a game which has a bit of a fond spot in my heart, flaws and all. So seeing this improved version pretty much come out of nowhere back then was well and truly appreciated when it was released. It's just a bit of a shame that outside of the later Ghosts and Goblins arcade, there really have not been any other reworkings as dedicated and as thorough as this for giving some of those underbaked C64 takes on arcade classics a bit more love and fixing the flaws. So I've got a level with you. Sports games, unsurprisingly, are not my jam. But sometimes you get one which manages to transcend its roots and find itself being enjoyed by folk who aren't necessarily fans of sports games. And that's Throwback Games' Jam It in a bit of a nutshell. It's a 2-on-2 basketball game which allows support for 4 players should you have one of those user-port 4-player joystick adapters handy. Unlike most other Commodore 64 basketball games, Jam It takes place on a half court, so when your team gets possession of the ball, you've got to run to the bottom of the screen to make sure you're in your half before you can shoot. It certainly makes things more frantic as you scramble for the bottom, then rush to try to sink a shot. It's a game which offers plenty of neat touches in its presentation, from replays being shown after certain shots, to the comprehensive stats presented between halftime and full time. It's also got plenty of options for when you don't have 3 friends to hand for a full 2-on-2 experience. Imagine, say, running 2 players cooperatively against the AI, or having 1 skilled player with the AI helper playing 2 less experienced players. Again, the fact that it manages to hook the interest of someone like myself is quite a good sign. And if you're into your sports games, it's one you probably should be checking out, especially if you're able to wrangle that full 4-player posse. I've always had a fondness for some types of single-screen collect 'em ups, and Aquarius's Super Carling the Spider is one of the relatively recent ones I had a blast with, both on release and coming back to it for the video. Released in 2016, it's all about recovering diamonds to clear the names of some types who've been framed. Each of its many rooms has a simple objective: collect the diamonds, avoid the dreaded balls of steel, and get to the exit before time runs out. It sounds simple in theory, but the way those balls of steel move about could truly throw you off if you're not careful. And that really adds to the challenge of getting through all its stages. Thankfully, there are some pickups which can tilt the odds in your favour, whether it's extra lives, or perhaps the ability to honk those dreaded balls for a few moments. There's quite a few on offer that make this one well worth puzzling through. It's very much a crafty puzzler which is easy to pick up, charming to look at, and an all-round good time to play. With the addition of level passwords to help you pick up where you left off as you work your way through, really helps you get back into it when you start a new session. Besides, if you can't chuckle at that animation which plays when poor Carling suffers a horrid fate, then you've got to wonder if you're quite the soulless monster. I feel like when folk talk about their love of shooters or shmups, they tend to focus on the staples, whether they scroll vertically or horizontally. For me, there's a big soft spot on those which focus on arena-style action, especially when you add elements of exploration to the mix. And that's where Moonspire happens to come into play. Your goal is to work through each level of the Moonspire fortress and recover all the control orbs before getting back to the entrance. To help you do this, your craft is equipped with 3 weapons: pulse cannons, homing missiles, and the nuke. Whilst the first of these offers unlimited shots, use of the latter 2 will need to be measured, as you're going to need to locate ammo packs around the map to keep your supplies handy. The structure of each level, where you'll be navigating a reasonably large map whilst avoiding or neutralising enemies as you search for those pods, can make for quite a challenge, especially as you're going to want to be careful with how you control your craft, taking advantage of both its weapons and the ability to fire whilst moving about, or changing firing angle whilst being fixed in place to avoid taking damage from the enemies. Moonspire might not satisfy the craving for fast-paced shooting action, but should you want something a little more thoughtfully paced out, where movement is just as critical as blasting for survival, then it's one which is probably well worth taking some time to check out. Platformers have come a long way since the early days of the flick screen collect 'em up, but the bare essential shows this formula still has a lot to offer for the modern Commodore 64 fan. You take charge of the titular bear, who's tasked with finding enough food for his family to survive the upcoming winter. So, what makes for enough? Well, it's some 350 apples. Which takes our bear on one heck of an adventure, working his way from his forest home into the jungles, the rocky fields, up amongst the clouds, and finally into the mines. Though nowhere near the challenge of iconic collect-em-ups like Jet Set Willy, the Bear Essentials still offers a trick or two up its sleeve. Rooms offer multiple exits, so knowing where each can lead is handy. Something which helps you manage this is the inclusion of an in-game map, which not only shows where you are overall, but whether you've cleared out a room of all the apples as well. Along with that, you can easily find extra lives, and there are continues as you reach intermediate sections. But more than that, I appreciate the Bear Essentials for just how chilled it can be, while still offering the type of challenge that's going to keep you engrossed for quite some time as you hunt down all 350 of those apples. Nightingale was a masterwork for exploratory Metroidvania-style platformers on the Commodore 64, and let's face it, it should be no surprise its follow-up would be just as special. Pains and Aches takes place right after the events of the first game, with the Archmage getting his grail and things taking a turn as his beloved suffers the same fate as that of the Knight's beloved for trying to enact a grand plan and failing. This of course means another expansive adventure, this time as the Archmage, who'll carry a few new tricks compared to the Knight. Many of which of course are required as you defeat the bosses you'll encounter. And these of course are going to help you get deeper and deeper into the castle where this adventure takes place. Speaking of the castle, there is a lot more to the quest here. It's a much bigger environment and there is so much more to it, and I got lots more enjoyment out of Pains and Aches as a result. It offers a fair challenge, a beautiful melancholic atmosphere, particularly delivered through the soundtrack, and has some neat mechanics on offer, all of which build upon the incredible foundations made with the original Nightingale. It's got to be said, Pains and Aches for me is very much one of those games I feel pushes the creative boundaries of what we get for platforms like the Commodore 64 in modern times like this. And it's one that I feel a little sad doesn't really get talked about the way other games which came out around the same time did. To me, this is an absolute masterwork and is well worth checking out should you be a fan of Metroidvania style experiences. I sort of poked on this a little earlier when talking about Moonspire, but the Commodore 64 is of course a platform known for a high variety of great shmups. The thing is though, many of them, the ones that we'd consider such classics, came out when the machine was still commercially viable. But one of the first I feel that is up there that came out in the homebrew era has to be Aviator Arcade II. Because even after all this time since its 2018 release, it still holds up. Not as just one of the best homebrew shooters released, but one of the best shooters all up. Things open up as you'd expect, with you taking charge of your fancy helicopter gunship, battling terrorist types. But once you get a few levels in, things take a drastically intergalactic turn. It's just the tip of the iceberg of how thrilling Aviator Arcade II is. From its multitude of levels, to the fancy array of power-ups on offer, there is a lot of shmup action on offer. And it's the kind of shmup action that doesn't rely on obtuse power-up systems, or a ridiculous degree of challenge in order to master it and feel competent with it. Which is why it stands so high for me. It doesn't rely on bullet hell mechanics, it doesn't require lots of enemies, it doesn't require intricate pattern dodging. It comes together so well, and it feels like you can learn it in a reasonable amount of effort. There's a lot of mechanics and tricks on offer, yet it becomes easy to zone out to, and of course, you can have quite the enjoyable time in the process as a result. And that's my picks. This isn't an exhaustive list of games from this period. There are plenty more out there which I feel should probably be on the list, and others which don't need to be because you probably already know them. These ones I feel are a little more special, and really it's about production time and whatnot, and this was really all I could get in a fair amount of time. Now though, it's over to you, because videos like this are all about encouraging you to not just watch these picks, but play them. I've included links to download them or purchase them in the video description, so take the time to go through the list, try them out for yourself. Whether that's playing on original hardware, running through some emulation or some other platforms, but most importantly, support the folks who create these games. It's important because it helps get new titles out there. This is the kind of thing that supporting creators gives them the motivation to put new games out there, and I think we can see so much more from developers as a result. So yeah, try some out, consider mention what your favourites were in the comments, and if you've got other favourites from the era, maybe mention those as well. But for now, there's not much more for me to say than to thank you very much for watching.